Heads.
It is heads.
I'll go for the negative side.
Okay. All right. Both of you will be timing yourselves throughout this. I trust that you will keep proper time. Virtually, other than that, do you have any questions, comments? All right.
I think we're good.
Okay, perfect. You may begin when ready.
All right. Judge ready?
Yes, sir.
Opponent ready?
Yes.
All right, I'll begin. John Stuart Mill, a philosopher, wrote in Utilitarianism in 1897, "The ultimate end, with reference to and for the sake of which all other things are desirable, whether we are considering our own good or that of the people, is an existence exempt as far as possible from pain and as rich in possible enjoyments, both in point of quantity and quality." Because I agree with John Stuart Mill and take an affirmative stand. Because I agree with John Stuart Mill, I take an affirmative stand on today's resolution. The United States ought to guarantee universal health care for its citizens. The quality of life has a momentous impact on our society as a whole. If the quality of life were to suffer, so would our existence as mankind, because if the quality of life is poor, then human life, government, and values all become impoverished. And without life, we become no more than animals. And without government, we become a worthless population of anarchy. Therefore, I uphold today's resolution with the quality of life as the most important value using the criteria of societal good. To further clarify today's topic, I offer the following definitions. United States. Country made up of North America extending from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean in between Mexico and Canada, including Hawaii and Alaska. Ought. Indicates that someone has a duty or obligation to do something or that it is morally right to do something. In other words, ought denotes a moral imperative. Guarantee. Something that serves as an assurance of or promises the happening of some event. Universal. Of, for, affecting, or including the whole of something, not limited or restricted. Healthcare. The maintaining and restoration of health by the treatment and prevention of disease, especially by trained and licensed professionals. Citizens. A native or naturalized person who owes allegiance to a government, it is entitled to protection from it. Contention 1. Universal health care will dramatically reduce human suffering, which in turn will enhance the quality of life. Human suffering is a very serious problem in America today. For example, many people cannot afford to pay for the medication that they need. A new survey done by the University of Pennsylvania showed that as many as 1 in 5 people do not take their medication due to a financial restraint. Many people with serious diseases just can't pay for their expensive medications and will either not buy them or cut their pills in half to make them last longer. This lack of proper medication puts a huge burden on the patient themselves and their families and causes lots of human suffering. If a universal healthcare plan were to be implemented, many people will receive the medication and treatment that they need, and their quality of life will improve along with their families, and then these people will put a positive effect on society as a whole and cause societal good. Robert M. Harold wrote in The Promise Beyond Pain in 1979, "Suffering appears to have no redeeming value, only pain and more pain. Allowing people to suffer from a lack of money is not the right option in any case. Being able to simply avoid vital medication should not be a continuous distress on anyone in their life, so therefore the U.S. must take action in providing all-embracing health care for its citizens." Contention 2. The United States needs to support its moral requirement to ensure societal good. The word ought in this resolution is denoted as a compulsory obligation. Because the United States as a country is about promoting societal good, then we must fulfill that duty and enact universal health care. Not providing it would be immoral and would allow the nation to deteriorate in the area of societal welfare. By doing so, the United States will provide for the general welfare, which is what they should do stated under the preamble of the Constitution, and it will complete its requirement. So we must ensure health care to all of our citizens. Margaret M. McLean, Ph.D., Associate Director of Bioethics at Marcula Center for Applied Ethics of Santa Clara University, wrote in her October 16, 2007 article, "The inherent dignity of human persons requires that people be treated with dignity and respect, which includes the fulfillment of the basic human need for health care. Health is a fundamental good necessary for human flourishing, and health care is a fundamental human right. Because health care, at its best, promotes and sustains human health, society is obligated to provide access to basic quality of health care for all of its members. If the government has the power to provide health care for its entire people, if it doesn't, it is denying the right to societal welfare for its people, and is therefore destroying the quality of life within the country, for without societal good in the country, the quality of life is overall is poor." In conclusion, referring back to the quote by Robert M. Harold, suffering causes no good and seems only to harm mankind. Universal health care in the United States would assist those struggling with their life due to a lack of funds and cause less human suffering on them and their lives. Communities would be raised as a whole from better health all around, and so would their lives, and they would promote societal good, leading to a better quality of life. The United States has a moral obligation to providing for the general welfare, and by not giving health care to its citizens, it is not providing for the general welfare and is therefore not doing its job. Simply being able to go to sleep at night knowing that they don't have to cut back on enjoyments just to afford medication, or knowing that they are not jeopardizing their health by not medicating properly will mean the world to anyone in that situation. So, due to the positive impact universal health care puts on the quality of life and the government's requirement to do so, I urge an affirmative ballot today.
Now for cross-examination. Judge ready?
Mm-hmm.
Opponent ready?
Yes.
Alrighty. So you say your value is the quality of life,
Correct.
and your value criterion is that of societal good.
Correct.
And you define ought, which is morally right, as you stated.
Yeah.
Who determines what is moral in the society?
Well, in the society as a whole, or just like each individual? Like each individual determines what's moral or immoral to them.
So
But-
each individual determines what is moral in a society.
What is moral to them and their morals?
Okay. Moving on to your first contention, which is the universal health care reduces suffering. Is that correct? And
Correct.
enhances the quality of life?
Yeah.
And your second contention is that the United States needs to uphold the moral requirement of providing health care.
Correct.
Now, what is the correlation between universal health care and saving lives?
Well, like I said, the 1 in 5 people do not take their medication that they need, as a study done by University of Pennsylvania. As I said before, this is very dangerous. This is not like this. You can get serious problems from not medicating properly, so therefore not taking your medication properly can actually impact you and cause serious illnesses.
But how does universal health care ensure that a person will take their medication?
Well, if universal health care, people who can't afford their medication now will have a medication option. They will be able to go to the doctors and get the medication they need.
Okay, so would you agree, though, that just because universal health care is implemented, there is no direct answer that this person's life will be saved?
There's no direct answer, but it would definitely improve their chances, and it will stop them from practicing harmful practices. So there's no guarantee that they will be improved living, but there will still be. It's like you will still have a chance. You have better health in your life.
Okay, and could you please restate your definition of guarantee?
All right, guarantee, something that serves as an assurance of or promises the happening of some event.
Okay, so you're saying that by implementing this universal health care, each person would have equal access to it?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I stand in negation of today's resolution. Resolved, the United States ought to guarantee universal health care to its citizens. In order to negate this resolution, I use the value of government legitimacy. To better define this value, I offer the following explanation. The Constitution of the United States is understood to establish limits to the power of the federal government. Because the Founding Fathers were fearful of the possible abuses of power by the federal government, they placed tight limits on the role of the government and how it ought to act. For example, the Bill of Rights, as well as the Declaration of Independence, highlights this idea. Furthermore, the 9th and 10th Amendments of the Constitution indicate the importance of protecting rights of the citizen from the federal government. With this value in mind, my value criterion is Hobbes' social contract. And I agree with the affirmative definition set forth. Contention 1. The government exists to protect life and individual liberties. In order to determine what policies are okay for the government of the United States to enact, the purpose of the government must be analyzed. Thomas Hobbes provides the best framework to understand this with his philosophy of the English social contract. Hobbes uses his hypothetical state of nature idea to analyze the role of the government. Hobbes' state of nature idea lacks a government. Thus, there are no laws to limit a person's liberties. Every man is equal because even the weakest has the ability to attack the strongest. Using Hobbes' words, life in the state of nature is characterized by continual fear and danger of violent death in the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. With this comes Hobbes' fundamental law of nature, which states that every man is made better by a state of peace that exists between men. The state of peace is provided for by the government. As shown, the fundamental purpose of the government is the protection of life. The role of the government is to provide laws and police that protect citizens and enforce property rights. The government thus works to uphold the liberties of its citizens after protecting their life. Such liberties are the right that the citizens have not given up to the government. Therefore, these include privacy, freedom of religion, and freedom of choice. Therefore, requiring that all individuals purchase health care violates the rights and freedoms of the individuals. Also, the national health care system would be subsidized by taxpayers. The individuals are thus used as a mean without them giving their rights to the government. As shown, implementing a universal health care system violates an individual's own personal freedoms. Contention 2. Healthcare is not a natural right. As previously aforementioned, the foundation of the United States government is the limited powers of the government. No rights in the Constitution addresses a universal health care, and thus in the 10th Amendment it states, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Clearly, what universal health care entails is not within the purview of the United States government and thus should not be implemented because it takes away the rights of the individuals. In fact, in the Harris versus McRae Congressional Research Services analysis, they mentioned that the Constitution does not obligate the states or the federal government to pay for medical expenses, even for the health care needs of poor persons. The government does indeed have an obligation to protect the life of its citizens. However, this right is considered a negative right. It can go the other way. The government has a responsibility to make sure that no law is passed to violate one's right to life. As shown, the Supreme Court has demonstrated that there is no right that mandates the government to provide funds for health care to protect its citizens' lives. Thus, when a government goes beyond what it is entitled to do, its obligations, the liberties, rights, and dignities of the individuals are violated, especially under Thomas Hobbes' social contract. The affirmative will try to argue that the United States does indeed have the power to create universal health care. They argue that such a country like the U.S. ought to have a right to health care. However, this argument absolutely contradicts the fundamental values our nation was founded upon, that is, unchanging, unalienable rights. The Constitution created a set of guidelines based upon unchanging principles to protect life and liberty of an individual. These would be contradicted and ignored if universal health care were to be implemented. Now, moving on to my opponent's case. His value is that of quality of life, which he defines as the values and aspirations of its people, and his value criterion is that of societal good. As we can see, and my opponent agreed in cross-ex, morality is defined by the individuals themselves, as he agreed to. So by implementing this universal healthcare system, the government is essentially taking away the person's liberties and personal freedoms by declaring that they must have this universal healthcare. So how can we say that it is moral if my opponent defined morality, changing between person to person? How can we say that it is moral for the government to provide one solution to all its citizens? Clearly, this is not moral because there are different morals that each person has. Moving on to his first contention, which is that universal healthcare reduces suffering and enhances the quality of life. I do agree, yes, healthcare reduces suffering. However, we cannot say that by implementing this universal healthcare system that suffering would decrease and lives would be saved. There's just no correlation. Though healthcare does provide an aid and a means to acquiring medication and such, we cannot say that by a person receiving this universal healthcare that they will be guaranteed to take their medicine. My opponent suggested many cases in which there were people who would not take their medicine and were suffering. But again, just because we implement this universal healthcare system does not mean they would take their medication and their lives would be saved. So we cannot say that suffering would be reduced and the quality of life would increase. His second contention was that the U.S. needs to uphold its moral requirement of providing healthcare. I do agree it is the government's right to protect the life of its citizens. However, we cannot say that just because they implement this universal health care that other rights are not violated. As I've mentioned, we have certain unalienable rights, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Surely one's happiness and their liberty is taken away when this universal health care is limited because, again, as I said, my opponent suggested that morals are change between one person to another. So we cannot say that it is moral and thus a person's liberties are taken away because they cannot choose whether or not they would like this health care. How can we expect a nation to fund this health care as well, as I've mentioned, when we are already so in debt that we cannot afford this universal health care. So I don't see the solution in implementing this universal health care. We can see that there are more negatives to the to the affirmative side. Thus, we must look towards the negative side in this round. So thank you, and I urge a negative ballot.
All right, I'd like to clear first, what is your value for the round?
Government legitimacy.
And your value criterion is Hobbes' social contract?
Correct.
And in Hobbes' social contract, you said that the government exists in order to protect life. That's the sole purpose of the government, correct?
Correct.
Okay, moving on. Now, also, later on in the Hobbes contract, you talk about how, you talk about how this will be subsidized by taxpayers. And you say that this will take away their liberties. How will this take away their liberty?
Because, again, your definition of guarantee, which is, it would be forced upon, but everyone would have this universal health care. They don't have the decision of whether or not they want it. It's guaranteed. So we can see that a person's liberties are taken away because they can't choose for themselves whether or not they want this health care.
Okay, now, also, you say that universal health care, there's no correlation between healthcare and being healthy, but wouldn't you agree that healthcare is, as I define it, as in order to maintain and restoration health, right? And restore health?
I would agree that yes, it does play a part in a person's health, but we cannot say that just because a person is receiving this healthcare that their lives will be saved.
I'm not saying that their lives will be saved, but it'll improve their health, right?
It's a person's decision on whether or not they want to partake in the health that is given to them.
Also, you're saying that there's no guarantee that people will take their medication. Well, wouldn't it seem like an obvious answer that if people have access to medication, wouldn't they take it?
Perhaps, but again, we can't, decide because this is universal health care. We cannot say that a person will definitely do this and that lives will be saved as a result of it.
Also, you say that the pursuit of happiness will be lost if we pass universal health care.
Yes.
How will the pursuit of happiness be lost?
I think we can all agree that making our own decisions pleases us rather than someone telling us what to do. And I think we can see that when the government implements this universal health care, we no longer have the right to decide whether or not we want it.
So you're saying if we don't have to decide whether or not to want it, we'll automatically become unhappy and we will not be able to pursue happiness anymore?
I think definitely happiness can be achieved in other ways, but that it limits our liberties, and thus when our liberties, something important to us, is taken away, we decrease in our level of happiness.
Okay, so it doesn't eliminate the pursuit of happiness, it only lowers the chance of happiness.
I believe so, yes, because we're not making our own decisions for ourselves.
Okay, I'll begin. First of all, I'd like to talk about my opponent's value and value criterion for the round. My opponent's value is government legitimacy, which basically means establishing the limits of the government's power. So my opponent sets up how the government, by passing universal health care, they're now gaining all this power, and that we must establish limits on the government power. And moving on to her value criterion, she says that Hobbes' social contract will support this. But in Hobbes' social contract, as she said, the government exists to protect life. And as I said before, if we have I asked her in cross-text, if we have health care, I asked her if it would improve health. And she said yes, to improve health. And health is the basis for having life. So if the government exists, and I asked her, its sole goal is to protect life. If it doesn't do, it has to do one thing, and it has to protect life. And so therefore, if the government is not protecting life, if the government does not have health care for the citizens, it is allowing the citizens to have unhealthy lives and risk their lives, then they are not protecting life. They are leaving it open to harm, and so therefore they're not doing their job. Also, now, moving on. My opponent also said later on in Hobbes' contract that every man will be better with peace between men. But right now there is no peace between men at all. The people on the lower end of society who cannot afford to pay their Medicare are generally upset with society. They do not have a chance to pursue happiness because, one, they are being bound by their medications and the bills that they must pay for those if they are taking them, and so if they're not taking them, they are bound by health issues. So these people have no pursuit to happiness as of now. So by voting for the negative, you are also declining the pursuit of happiness for these people. Also, my opponent says that the values the nation that we were founded on will be violated. But My opponent says, but never clarifies what values will be violated. She says that individual liberties will be taken away, but she says it's a choice of whether or not to take health care or not. But like and moving on to the example, she said there's no guarantee that people will take the medication. But this is an obvious answer to the question. Would you rather jeopardize your health or take medication when you have an obvious, easy access to it? This is no issue. There is a correlation between how universal health care will help reduce suffering and will help reduce the deaths because she's saying that there's no guarantee that people will take their medication, but it's a dumb statement because whenever you have something that will help save your life, you're not going to deny it. And moving back to what I said about what values, this will help me out in this argument. Now, moving on. I said that individuals will be that morality is based on an individual stance, that the individuals think what is moral, and she says that taking away the liberties cannot be moral for the government. But again, moving back to the people now who can't afford the medication, who can't afford to get these things, who are not living in a healthy way and they cannot. They are having their liberties kind of taken away, just like they're having their pursuit of happiness taken away. Now, moving on to the pursuit of happiness again. As I said, she said that I asked her in cross-examination that their pursuit of happiness is not gone if universal health care is added, and she said that's correct. And so therefore, the pursuit of happiness does stand with universal health care. And actually, it increases to the people who cannot afford their medication. As I said before, the lower end of society, it actually increases their pursuit of happiness, and it may limit you with more taxes, which is not the issue. But your pursuit of happiness is still there, and it is just as strong. However, these people do not have the ability to pursue happiness, and therefore we must take action in providing universal health care for its citizens. And finally, now I would like to address some of my points. As I said in my contention 1, I said that universal health care would dramatically reduce human suffering, which my opponent agrees with. She said in her first case, she said that universal health care will dramatically reduce suffering, and she said that there's no correlation. But however, I prove there is a correlation because health care restores health, as the definition says so. And now with health in life, you have a much better chance of life and being able to provide yourself with life, and so the government will be doing its job. And also, my opponent says that it will be. My opponent says about my contention too that it will not be moral for the United States to ensure societal good, as I said in my contention too. But now that I've proved that it is moral, that the government still it's not like it's immoral now because people get a free service to them. Just because they don't have a choice doesn't mean that this is not an immoral action. And now, as this has flown throughout their own, I urge an affirmative ballot today.
Okay, I will begin. So my opponent's value is that of quality of life, as I've already stated, and his value criterion is that of societal good. In my opponent's last speech, he mentions a lot about how health is the basis for life and that it's not moral to allow citizens to suffer, as well as that happiness still exists with universal health care. So I'll just touch upon those points today. I agree that health is the basis for life. However, I would not agree that it has to be this universal health care. As again, I've stated many times before that with this universal health care comes with negative side effects in that people's rights are taken away. My point in offering Hobbes' social contract as my value criterion was to juxtapose a society without government, that is, as I described, citizens living in continual fear and danger of violent death in the life of man, as I described as solitary, poor, naturally brutish, and short. This was in Thomas Hobbes' words. And then I juxtapose that with Hobbes' social contract, which states in a society where there is government, and to show why government is necessary and important. And my opponent keeps mentioning how, yes, that health, it is the right of the government to protect a citizen's health. I do agree with this, but again, I do not agree that it should be universal, because in no way the Constitution or any declaration sent forth by the United States government says that we must provide our citizens universal health care. Yes, I do agree that we must allow our citizens to have access to health care, but in no way does this have to be universal, and thus it takes away our liberties. My opponent asked, well, how does this take away our liberties, and what are they? Or what rights are being taken away with this universal health care? And again, that is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Just because health is the basis for life, again, it does not have to be universal. My opponent now keeps mentioning how that pursuit of happiness would still exist with this universal health care, but I disagree. I think we can all agree that when somebody else is making decisions for us, in this case the government, citizens tend not to be happy because, again, my opponent mentioned that morality differs person to person. I think we can all agree that we have different values than another person who on a same issue. So how can we expect the United States government to enact this universal health care when we do have these different values? We cannot say that happiness will exist with this universal health care. Though happiness, I guess, yes, can exist, it will be diminished because, again, another power is making decisions for us. We are not making these decisions for ourselves. So we can see that the autonomous freedom that we have as individuals is taken away, and thus our happiness diminishes because we are not making our own decisions. So yes, I did clarify what values are taken away. That is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I would also like to clarify the fact that, again, there is no correlation between universal health care and, say, people's lives being saved. Though, yes, I do agree that they may have more direct access to this medication. In no way are we saying that by having this direct access that people's lives will be saved. And how can we, again, going back to his value of quality of life and that his value criterion of societal good, how can we say that the quality of healthcare received would be better in a world with universal health care? After all, there are more patients to see, more people to take care of. How can we say that by implementing this universal health care that the quality of life would increase? Because how do we know that this health care is as it is today without being universal? Because, again, there are more patients to see, so how can we guarantee that each person will receive the same quality of health care for this universal health care system? So now, reviewing my case, my value is that of government legitimacy, and my value criterion is Hobbes' social contract. Government legitimacy is important in this case because it states what powers the government has and does not have. We can see, as I've stated before, that the government does not clearly have the right to implement this universal health care because it goes against our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Clearly, something that takes these things away cannot be implemented because, again, the government cannot take away our rights as people, which is, again, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My value criterion is that of Hobbes' social contract, and we can see why the government is so important in this case using Hobbes' social contract, which he juxtaposes society without government and then places that same society with government. And we can see that it is the role of the government to protect its citizens, and by protecting its citizens, that means upholding their liberties, which when implementing this universal health care system does not do. So now some key voting issues. Though health is very important in any society, we can see that it is not the role of the government to protect and provide for the citizens' health. I agree life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are important, but we can see that with the affirmative side, these are surely taken away because, again, we do not have the freedom of our decisions on the universal health care side, and happiness would be decreased because, again, we are not making our own decisions. For these reasons, we can look that we must vote to the negative side for this case. So thank you.
Okay, I will start by restating some key voting issues and restating how on crystallizing around and moving on to voting issues. Okay, first of all, my opponent's value criterion is the Hobbes social contract, and then it says the government exists to protect life. And because under the negative world, I've shown that life is not being protected because health is not being protected, which my opponent agrees that health is the base of life. Therefore, in a negative world, life is not being protected, and if the government is not protecting life, then therefore this argument is invalid. So therefore, the value criterion for my opponent's value criterion for the round goes to me. And also, I'd like to state that my values also hold. Still hold. I say that my value is the quality of life and it's societal good. My opponent mentions them, but never does she have any argument against them. But because I said that the quality of life will increase from this, and she said that there's no correlation between between saving lives. But I've shown that there is, because if healthcare increases health, then health will increase life. So therefore, my values hold while the value criterion of my opponents goes to me. Now, moving on. My opponent says that she agrees that health is the basis to life, and that healthcare will increase health. But she keeps saying that this is not the right way. That this is not the right way to gain health to all of this. To gain health to all. But this is the only way. If she agrees that we should have health care to all, and that health is necessary to keep life in order to gain life to all, there's no other solution that anyone can provide as of now except the universal health care. Universal health care will provide health and basic access to health for all. And so, since universal health care will provide health care and health care to all, my opponent has no other solution. Therefore, this solution, the affirmative solution, would be the best choice. Also, my opponent again says people that aren't happy will be diminished in this. But then she keeps saying that because our rights such as life and the pursuit of happiness will be gone. As I said, that pursuit of happiness is still there and it's ever is real. The pursuit of happiness does not leave as soon as universal health care is passed. Say if people do become upset because the government is making choices for them and they aren't happy, they still have the option to pursue happiness. The pursuit of happiness does not leave with universal health care, as I've stated. But my opponent keeps saying that we lose the pursuit of happiness. However, this is incorrect. Now, moving on to voting issues. I feel the affirmative solution is the best and only solution because of how the pursuit of happiness remains, and it increases for people who cannot provide for themselves. How that the human suffering will be reduced because, as I said in my contention 1, how families and people who are not medicating properly will have stress relief, and their quality of life will improve, and communities will improve. And so, therefore, in the opponent's world, the opponent does not provide an upholding to life and says that the pursuit of happiness is gone. However, it is still existent in my world. And so, therefore, my opponent can only uphold liberty of the 3 unalienable rights we keep talking about. And so, because I hold the majority of these, I urge an affirmative ballot today.
Okay. Basically, I'm going to disclose who won, and then I'm going to do a very brief critiquing of you both. Let me preface this by saying, before I enter the room for any debate, I rid myself of predispositions and I look at both arguments in a vacuum. And looking at it from that perspective, getting rid of my predispositions, I firmly believe that Julie won the negative side. And let me give a couple reasons why here. First, I think a debate has both an appearance and a content portion to it. So let me go to the superficial one first, appearance. Just by appearance, Julie seemed the more poised, and with the inflections of her voice and her general sentence structure, she seemed more passionate about what she's talking about, more believable, consequently, which is not necessarily true in your side, the affirmative side. And now going to the content portion, I want to move on to your first case. You talked about how healthcare reduces human suffering. And, I really started having issues with your case when you limited the scope of healthcare to only medication. Healthcare, the scope of healthcare, I think both of you can agree, goes way beyond just medication. And, that kind of was a theme of your case as a whole, that lack of scope. And what really sold me to Ms. Buchwald's side was when you said, and I quote, and I apologize for the double negatives here, just because people do not have a choice does not make it immoral. I think when you look at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, when you say, oh, well, they don't have a choice in the matter, when I believe Julie said in her original case that government has a duty to protect life insofar as to guarantee the existence of life. It is the individual's liberty and choice to do what they want with their life, whether or not it is to harm themselves. To implement universal health care is a slippery slope. And considering it from that perspective, considering it from the potentiality of implementing health care, what else could be gotten rid of and abolished? And just basically summing up, an individual has a choice to live their life as they please, insofar also, as Julie said, as they do not harm another individual. And that is the scope of government. That is where government intrusion should cease. And that is why Julie won the debate. Thank you.